It was 20 years ago, at this now abandoned farm, where a boy, supposedly possessed by evil, was taken from his home by a frenzied mob and thrown over this waterfall, where he perished. That boy is about to seek revenge over the town that murdered him. He knows this, he says, because he himself is the heir apparent to that throne of terror so long held by the likes of Voorhees, Myers, and Kruger. This man's name is Leslie Vernon.
Welcome to Comic Chop News. I'm Dan, and today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite movies, Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. This is one of those oddball movies that came out. When you watch the trailers, you're like, okay, they're making a mockumentary about the rise of a serial killer. What you didn't get from that trailer was how actually interesting the character would become, and while silly, also having some poignant moments. Nathan Baesal, I think that's how it's pronounced, he plays Leslie Vernon, aka Leslie Mancuso. I'll get into that part a little later. And we start out with this character, Taylor, who is a journalist who, with her film crew, doing this documentary, or sort of like Dateline, Barbara Sawyer type interview of how someone becomes a slasher serial killer. This makes little subtle jabs at the slasher genre in general, and she's interviewing him, and he's talking about how he made up this backstory about him as a boy and how he was thrown down a waterfall and eaten by turtles, and how his mother was raped. And as we're doing this, he's explaining some of the stuff that, like she sees his library, and he's explaining, the books do have to do with work, Grey's Anatomy. He has books on sleight of hand and other such things. Nathan Baesal as Leslie is kind of charming in a weird way, where there's an earnestness and a silliness to it where you don't take him seriously. And as Angela gets to know him, he starts explaining his routine, like how cardio is super important because, you got to run like a gazelle. And he shows how she can get a 10-step head start on him, and he'd catch her. As we're doing this, he starts pointing out his final girl. He finds her. He's been studying her. And you go into how he sets these sort of little traps or setups where she'll see him, he'll disappear. She'll see him, he'll disappear. During one of these where he brings Taylor with him, they go to a library where Zelda Rubinstein, who some would remember from Poltergeist, she was the one, Carol Ann, go into the light, Carol Ann. So she's a librarian there, and he has these newspaper clippings planted to make her think that her great uncle had raped Leslie's mom. And he starts showing up in the library, kind of bouncing from place to place. And Robert Englund shows up playing actually the hero character, as they call the Ahab. He's Doc Halloran, who he was Leslie's psychiatrist in Reno. We also find out from Doc Halloran a little bit later, which I'll flat out say he is a caricature almost of Loomis from Halloween. But he reveals to Taylor that actually Leslie's name was Leslie Mancuso. He's from Reno, and he's delusional. Going on from there, Leslie takes her after he finds out he has an Ahab to this gentleman Eugene and his wife's house, and Eugene was an OG slasher, and I believe it was the writer or director said that Eugene is actually supposed to be Billy from Black Christmas, which was one of the very first slashers, or one of the big holiday slashers. And his wife was one of his victims, his final girl. Which weirdly, if you're doing the math of Black Christmas and how the wife acts, it might be Margot Kidder's character. I'm unsure, because she kind of has that kind of personality. I'm not sure. It could be even post after that movie. It was one of his survivor girls. Anyway, he explains how, the game has changed because of Fred, Mike, Jason, and he kind of waxes poetic about it.
So you mentioned most of the guys in your line of work today are hacks.
I'm not talking about the guys that really worked hard, like Jay, Fred, Mike. There weren't nobody like them in the early years. We just hit hard, wiped everybody out, and disappeared as soon as we could without ever giving a thought to coming back. Those boys lifted it to a whole other level. They made an art form of it, turned themselves into legends by returning like a curse over and over again. That was a radical change in philosophy. Changed the whole business.
The business of supernatural killing sprees.
And it's kind of fascinating and starts explaining the game, basically. And they're all congratulating Leslie for having his Ahab. From there, the game escalates, and Leslie's now setting up his end game and explaining to Taylor how he set all these traps around the house. He has everything rigged to work in his favor, and he is putting on, I guess you'd call it, his war paint, getting his face ready. He's putting on his mask, and he starts crying because he's so excited and happy about what's about to happen. And Taylor starts to freak out a little bit because, she can't let this happen. Her cameramen are telling her, just walk away from this. Let's just go. And she can't do it. And Leslie has anticipated already that she is going to do what she does. That's one of the things about Leslie. He kind of has every eventuality fixed. And the big swerve of it is the girl, Kelly, who he's been telling her the whole time is his virginal final girl. It's really not. He actually used her as a red herring, and it's been Taylor the whole time. That's who he picked to be his final girl. And he's knocking off her cameraman and some of the other teens. Kelly ends up dying from falling into one of the traps as she goes out the window, and he already pre-cut the branches on the tree so that they'd break and the person would die from a long fall. Again, the movie kind of switches gears a lot, where you're like, okay, Leslie's crazy, this isn't going to happen, or this is just a joke documentary. But so we move on from there, and the final chase starts, and Taylor finally goes into final girl mode, and her and Leslie have their confrontation. She ends up grabbing his scythe and getting him, stabbing him with it. And then, as in all the movies that we end up seeing, she pours gas, because of course that's neatly laid out, and she burns the farmhouse down. Doc Halloran and the other camera crew from her crew come over, and she's like, it's over, and Doc Halloran does the, kind of Loomis, oh no, it's not over yet. The movie is so fascinating because it's jokey, yet charming. It was an under-the-radar type movie when it came out, and it's got quite a cult following. I know they were trying to make a sequel at one point. They were going to make it called Before the Mask. The never hit the crowdfunding numbers it needed. I'm really hoping it's not dead, because it was just such a fascinating movie to watch and wholly entertaining. I also watched the entire credits because they show through closed circuit TV Leslie's body being brought into the morgue and the guy's got, headphones on, he's checking in the body and everything, and it's playing the Talking Heads Psycho Killer, which, fantastic song, just a great needle drop for this kind of movie. And as the song's going, you keep watching and you think nothing's going to happen. Just as the song and the credits are ending, he rises up, Michael Myers style, turns his head, sees him, and then the closed circuit TV cuts off. Again, like, just great stuff. The score in the movie, you don't really notice it a lot, but with the chase through the woods with Taylor and Leslie, there is somewhat of a slight offshoot of the Friday the 13th chase music from Part 2, which I thoroughly enjoyed because once I realized that it was playing, it was a nice little homage. The movie itself, I would hit with probably a 4 out of 5. The creativity with it and the way they were able to turn this Dateline type documentary into this crazed horror movie at the end, slasher flick, that makes fun of itself but at the same time takes itself very seriously, is just fascinating. I recommend anybody watch this. I'm not sure if it's still on streaming. It was on Netflix at one point. You can pick up the DVD rather cheap. I got mine from Amazon for like around $12 to $15 a couple months ago. But totally worth watching. Yeah, so with that, I totally recommend you go buy it. This is a buy. This isn't even like a rent and watch. Just buy it. It's a great movie to have in your collection. And I think it's a movie that you could have your friends who aren't into horror movies watch, and there's enough kind of goofiness in it that they won't think it's a slasher movie until it actually hits the slasher part. So with that being said, I'm Dan. Thank you for joining me. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and have a great time watching this movie. I did. Good night.